everyone, welcome back to another season of the Living Unashamed podcast. I'm your host, Ruth Turner, and it's so awesome to have you here as we connect with people from all walks of life as they share their journey of encountering Jesus. If you haven't had a listen to our previous season, feel free to go back and check it out. There's some pretty amazing episodes of how people came to know Jesus and what that encounter has done for them for the rest of their journey so far. The song that was in the background today is called Praise His Name by Skytoes, and if you're interested, feel free to check them out on Spotify. So welcome. It's awesome to have you here, and let's get into it. Welcome to this day's episode of Living Unashamed. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of the Living Unashamed podcast. Today I'm excited to introduce to you a woman of God I was blessed to meet a few years ago in my Melbourne days. Her name is Danni Synot. Some of you may have heard her on the radio at 89.9 Light FM, as well as the Light FM in Port Hastings area. She is a woman who has been through a lot in her life, but has a beautiful story to share of the faithfulness and love of God. I'm excited to have you listen to what she has to share. There is a lot of beautiful wisdom and encouragement. So enjoy, and I look forward to hearing your feedback if you feel like leaving any. All right, here we go. This is Danni Synot. Well, thanks, Danni, for coming today and being able to share a bit about yourself and about how you encountered Jesus. For those of you who don't know Danni Synot, I know her through her organization called Brave Enough, where she was doing conferences, and also from the radio in Melbourne. But Danni Synot, you are and have shared that you are a preacher. You've also written a book and you are on radio, and you've recently just released a new podcast series, which is exciting. How's that going?
Yeah, fantastic. We've just wound up with season 1 of Brave Conversations podcast, and had some great responses. And it's been awesome just hearing people's real life stories and how they've overcome their challenges in life. And it's pretty spectacular to see what God can do.
Awesome. Yeah, it's amazing. It's even with these podcasts, like just how God moves in the storytelling process, and it just is so eye-opening to see how he is moving in people and how he calls people and what he does for his glory through them. So I'm super excited that you are here to share, but also I'm really happy that things are going well for you and with Brave Enough and Brave Conversations. Before we go into talking about your story, I just wanted to ask a little question about Brave Enough as a company. What kind of led you into starting, I guess, Brave Enough for that whole journey, I guess?
Yeah, it was really interesting. And I tell you what, setting up a not-for-profit organization or a charity, it's a massive process. And so I don't know, I think unless you're called to do it and you're really passionate about something, it's probably not something you touch with a 10-foot pole as far as getting started with that. But no, it's good. I think, where that really birthed from was actually a series of, I guess, incidents with people. So because I do a lot of speaking, and certainly, 10 years ago when I was sort of out and about quite a lot internationally, it was really interesting. I would go and I would be speaking. So whether that be, a conference event or a retreat or, a church camp meeting, whatever that happened to be. And people would stop me and they'd say, Danni, thank you for being brave enough to share your story.
Wow.
This is what happened to me. And then they would pour out with their own story of heartbreak or challenge. And what was interesting to me was that no matter where this was happening, whether it was out in the Cook Islands or in New Zealand or, wherever, people were using that same phrase, thank you for being brave enough. And, it was just something that God really stuck in my heart when it came to that realization that he was actually calling me to make that side of ministry a lot more, I guess, accessible for people. Because what I found was when I would have these engagements with people and they would say, oh, thanks for being brave enough to share your story. This is what happened to me. I could be with them in the moment. I could preach a message that was inspirational and it touched their hearts and it gave them some hints about how to move forward with their issues. But then I had to go home
Mm.
And I know for me, when I had to break through some of my issues and challenges in life, I haven't done it alone. I've had mentors, I've had people that have walked the journey ahead of me, I've had counselors, I've had, friends that have been, faithful in those spaces. And, there've been books and resources that I've read. And I thought, I feel like I'm opening up a can of worms for people because, yeah, I can do the inspiration and turn the light bulb on. But when I leave, where do they go? And I don't know what their local services are because I don't live in their town or their city. And so that's where Brave Enough was birthed. I sat with God on it and he said, hey, set up a website, put some resources on there, be a bit of a hub to get people the help they need on all of those different issues. And that's exactly what I did. It was literally me being brave enough to step out, just like we all do, one step at a time.
Yeah, and that's beautiful. It's, I believe, from what I saw when I went to one of the conferences, like I didn't realize just how much of an impact that had on so many people. And it's amazing. And it was really eye-opening for me. And yeah, I really encourage anyone to kind of go and check out the website and look at your resource and stuff because there's a lot of time and energy and efforts that gone into them, and that's from a genuine place of love and care for people. And I think it's really awesome. So yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Right. Well, Ruth, can I just ask you a question with that? What was it about the Brave Enough conference? Like, what was the impact for you?
Yeah, I think I just found it very powerful that people were willing to share the depth of their journey and the pain that they went through and the impact that that had. And that kind of opened up this place of vulnerability for others to just connect and go, okay, I'm not the only person who's alone in this. And um, just the atmosphere in that room, I think, was just really, really powerful. It was definitely a space where you could tell God was at work and doing something, whether it was making connections with people who could help, or whether it was just maybe some people hadn't, as you're saying, hadn't had those conversations before. And there's like this ripple effect from one person to opening up to more and more and more. And I think it was just a really beautiful space for people to do that. And I hadn't really experienced that much outside a normal church environment before. So yeah, I found it really impactful, and it really spoke to me that if one person could do something like this, then a million people could do something like that. And that could, in the end, ripple out to really change the world. So yeah, it was one of my pivot moments, I guess, that God really used to open up what the potentials of what I and other people could do in the future to make a difference. So, yeah.
Amazing. That's the aim of the game.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it was very powerful. And I believe that there'll be lots of people who would give a very similar response, I imagine. Because if something is God breathed, then it's gonna move whether we try to make it move or not, you know. And I think, the fruit of your life really speak for itself, how God's really blessed you in multiple streams of things, just goes to show that He's in it and through it. And it's part of His purpose for you, which is really awesome.
Yeah, thanks. I need to hear that just as much as the next person.
That's all right. So Brave Enough was such a big thing for your journey, but I guess the podcast series is really about where the journey all began. So for you, how did you start, I guess, having a relationship with Jesus, or even coming to realize that God was calling you into these next big chapters of your life?
Yeah, wow, that's a big question because it's been a big journey. I didn't grow up as a Christian, and so I didn't have Jesus growing up. I didn't have parents praying for me. I didn't know what the Bible stories. I didn't know any of that. And it wasn't until I think I was about 7 at the time. And I went to have an access visit with my dad, who lived about 5 hours away, and went with him for the weekend. And he had started going to church. And so that was my first experience of church. And I remember the layout of, just I guess where the stage was and where everyone was seated. And I remember having communion. And then I remember in the afternoon, going back to my dad's house, and he's sitting there on the couch, and he sat me on his knee and he gifted me with one of those big illustrated children's Bibles.
Wow.
And he said, this is all about God and the Bible, and told me all about my Father in heaven who loves me. And that was all amazing. And then, we packed up and went home. And when he dropped me home, because we'd gone there in a small light aircraft, he'd got his pilot's license and his friend had a plane. And so we'd actually caught a taxi from the airport to home. And so we'd said our goodbyes. He hopped in the taxi. And I remember as he was saying goodbye that there was just something in me. You know how we get that women's intuition? Like there's just something in our gut that's like something's not right. And he got in the car and he drove off and down the road. And I remember my eyes just followed him as the taxi went around the corner and then out of sight. And that was the last time I saw my dad again until I was 16. He just cut contact. And yeah, and he was gone. And so it wasn't obviously until a little while after that that I'd realised that's what had happened. But, looking back on it now, I kind of go, man, the day I hear about Jesus and I find out about Jesus, and I believed everything he said. I believed it was right and true. And but on the same day, I lose my own father, and it was it was tough. And then my life at home after that point started to get difficult. My mum and stepdad had just had another baby, their own child together. I also had a stepsister that was a year older. And then my dad and his wife had Katie, and I just met her for the first time on that visit. But it was, as that sort of had wound up with my dad cutting contact, my stepdad, who I got along with really well up until that point, started to become very verbally and sometimes physically abusive.
Wow.
And so, I mean, he would, call me all sorts of names and F-bombs. And I remember one day, I just wouldn't even have to do anything to get into trouble. He would even come down the hallway after work and look for things. This one particular day, he asked me to clean my room, and I said, why should I? Because I was copying my stepsister. And he called me the equivalent of a big swear word, prostitute, grabbed me by the hair and slammed my head into the wall.
Wow.
And just little things like, if I couldn't remember how to do my maths homework because I was just not good at maths, and he would stand there and lecture me and tell me about how stupid I was and I would never amount to anything. And so, day after day of that, I very quickly lost a lot of confidence. I had 3 major abandonments within about an 18-month period, because not only did I lose my dad, but my stepdad, because I'd lost the relationship that I'd had with him, because he just, all of a sudden turned towards this hatred of me. And then my mum got postnatal depression after having my brother and ended up in hospital for quite a while. And for the years and years afterwards, she was very emotionally unavailable. I remember when she came out of hospital one day, I would be just standing there. And this was like something that happened quite often. And it'd be, Mum, Mum, Mum. And she'd just ignore me and not be able to engage. And this one particular day, I asked her for a hug and she said, I can't, I've got to change the light globe. And I was like, now I'm not even as important as a light globe.
Wow.
And so it was, I felt very, I guess, unsafe and unloved in that environment. But I always had held on to what my dad had said about God. And my grandma was the opposite. She lived a couple of hours away, and I saw her a lot of weekends and school holidays. And she had grown up a Christian and very much still had her Christian morals, and was very nurturing, and she would stick up for me. And if it wasn't for her, I don't think I would have had a really good example of what, love is supposed to be for a child. And I think that kept me very stable. But I remember one particular day, a couple of years later, I was sitting down and my mum came in and said something. And I said to her, Mum, you know what? I know Santa's not real. And she said, oh, you shouldn't say that. You won't get any presents. And I said, no, he's not real, because Amy and Sarah told me. And she said, yeah, well, I suppose you're old enough to know now. No, Santa's not real. And I started crying. And I'm like, what about the Easter Bunny? No, he's not real. What about the Tooth Fairy? No, he's not real. I said, what about God? And she said, well, I don't believe it, but you have to make your own mind up about that one.
Yeah, wow.
And it was the first time in my life that I realized that my mum was actually wrong about something. You know, as a little kid, you just think your parents know everything, they're right about everything. But and it's not that I didn't want to not be able to believe in God like the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny and Santa. It was that I just knew that it was true. And so I kind of just held on to it. And then it wasn't till I was about 16, my mum and my stepdad had split up, and I was going through, really rough time, like most teenagers do, trying to find yourself and, trying to get over some trauma and all of that. And this particular friend who was visiting from Melbourne, who was already an adult, was a Christian and went to a church and invited me along. And I accepted Jesus there that day. And that was great. And I think in my heart I'd already accepted Jesus as a young girl, but it was kind of a formal guided thing more when I was 16. But she had to then go home a couple of weeks later, and then I was kind of at a loss about what to do, because I, was getting to know Jesus, but I had no one to guide me. And I happened to write it in my journal for English. And my English teacher saw what I'd written and held me back after class and said, hey, I was reading in your diary that you became a Christian. She said, I just want to know if you ever need to talk, I'm here. And also if you want to come to church, it's at this place at this time, and there's a lot of kids from school that go. And so I took her up on it, and I did. And I got baptized, and yeah, and that was kind of my journey with Jesus, for a few years. But I still didn't have a lot of mentoring. So it wasn't really until I had some other events happen, the loss of a baby in particular, that I really started to seek Jesus as an adult for myself. And so, yeah, that's sort of how I came to know Jesus, not the typical story. And, I just thank God every day that I did. A little bit like Lauren Daigle's song, Thank God I Do. I think sometimes we're just holding on to the edge, aren't we? With God.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing. Yeah, there's a lot that you have gone through. How did you find after you had received Jesus and you started on that journey with him, how did you find that the pains and the traumas, even experiences from your past, for you, did you find it was a slow and steady kind of burning candle kind of healing experience? Or did you find that there were some moments where there was like a really supernatural deliverance in a particular moment for some of those things?
Yeah, great question, Ruth. I think my journeys probably was a little bit disjointed, just because the nature of, what had happened to my childhood. But I'd say at the moment that when I lost my baby, that's when I had a really deep spiritual experience and a yearning and a seeking, because it was like, I didn't blame God. I wasn't angry with God, but it was more about all of the unanswered questions all of a sudden, like, where's my baby? Will I ever see him again? What's next? And God, what about heaven? And then the questions. And what happened was I had a guy at work who was a Christian with him and his wife, and his name was Colin Holman, and everyone used to call him Colin Holy Man behind his back, because he was so straight 180. He was just so Christian, like in all the right ways. And so I'd go up to Colin and I'd go, Colin, what about this or what about that? Like, what happens when you die? And so give me an answer, and then he'd go, but don't take my word for it. You read the Bible. And so I'd go and I'd check the Bible when I got home. And then I was asking so many questions. I just had this hungering, like, it's like God had set this fire in my spirit for answers. And so I started keeping it in my drawer at work. And like, just to give you a bit of context there, I was working at Centrelink in a call center. And so that's not a place where you should have a Bible, right? I mean, you should, because God needs Jesus in that place. But what I'm saying is if I got caught with it and, asking questions about that kind of thing, it just wouldn't have been okay. And so I was shuffling more and more across to Colin in between calls and on my breaks. And eventually he kind of got a little bit jack of it. And he was like, Danni, have you ever heard of a concordance? And I've gone, no, what's that? Well, it's like a book that's kind of like a dictionary. You've got all of these words in it, and it'll tell you the meaning of the word and where you can find it in the Bible. I'm like, okay. And I said, well, where do I get one of those? And he said, at the Christian bookshop. And I said, well, where's the Christian bookshop? And he's like, it's on Packington Street and it's in Newtown. I'm like, oh. And he told me the name of it. I'm going, oh, that's like literally around the corner from my house. So I went in and I got a concordance. Well, then it was just open slather. If there's something I needed to know, I'd look up the word, I'd study the word, I'd go into the Bible and look at it all in context. And God just took me on this exponential journey. And I think one of the reasons I was so desperate at the time was not only the grief of losing Jackson and wanting those questions, but I had such bad anxiety at the time that there was a period during that time where I couldn't drive the car or even leave the house. Like, I was really debilitated. My weight dropped to like 49 kilos. It was awful. And so when you talk about, having that experience with God, I mean, I was desperate. I was desperate for answers. I was desperate to keep my head above water. I was desperate to just in life. And I think that's very true when we really seek God, is there's a desperation about it. There's a knowledge that, the things that happen to us in this life are bigger than ourselves to get out of sometimes. And I remember this one particular day when I had a really big encounter with the Holy Spirit. And it was during that time when I was just so broken and couldn't leave the house and just desperate. And no one told me how to do this, but it was just something that came. And I was at home. I was in the middle of a panic attack. My husband was at work. I had nobody to call on. And I was just sobbing and sobbing. And I started to pray. And everything that I'd done wrong, I reckon, in my whole life would just come to mind. And I was just praying it off and repenting and went through this whole process. And then I just felt this whole weight lift off and I was exhausted in a good way. And I looked up at the clock on the mantelpiece and I'd been praying flat out for 3 hours.
Wow.
Like, just phenomenal. And I felt lighter and something had broken off. And it wasn't long after that we started attending a church. We'd actually been looking for a church while I was pregnant because I'd wanted to get back to that. And my husband at that stage believed in God, but wasn't really a Christian. And ended up finding a church and getting involved. And within 18 months, I was baptized. Again, I was rebaptized because I was in a different denomination. And then another 18 months after that, and I was preaching and in my first call to ministry and assistant pastoring. And then, of course, since then, done lots and lots of things in Christian media and hosting news programs and documentaries and podcasts and written a book and got my counselling qualifications and spoken in lots of places around the world. And then got led to found Brave Enough and do all of that stuff, helping other people to get unstuck and to be brave enough to just take the next step, to get unstuck from whatever's holding them back. And, I guess breathing on God's babies, just like the valley of dry bones, telling them to come alive because, man, we're all stuck with something, or we think we are. We're never really stuck, but we sometimes feel like we are.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, there would have been a lot to process through that journey. with all that, especially even when you've started in ministry, you wouldn't have probably in your wildest dreams ever thought that you would end up where you are today. Back at the beginning when you were just helping out with your first church, or you're stepping into the preaching and on the platform. The transition between that to what you have accomplished with God up until this moment, was that a pretty quick process, or did that take quite a bit of time to get to from the first day you preached, I guess, up until where you are now with all of your other streams of ministry? Yeah, was that something that happened like kind of like a domino effect pretty quickly, or did that just take quite a few years and different times, I guess, different moments and different seasons?
Yeah, look, the whole process would be at least 21 years. And I can mark that because I know when my daughter was born and, that it was shortly before that the ball started rolling on it. So, yeah, it has been a long time. And I feel like I really can't take credit for any part of it other than saying yes to Jesus, because every single door that's opened up, and I mean every single door, Ruth, like from pastoring churches to television ministry to radio to podcasting, all of it, I have not once applied for a position.
Yeah, well,
Every single time God has opened a door and I've had a job offer or a call, like a literal calling. And so I really have just literally walk the walk and talk the talk as far as being brave enough, just literally sometimes afraid out of my brain, just stepping into the unknown and into the next thing. And sometimes I think in life, we can have a vision and a goal and we work towards it and we work hard and we do all of that. And I think God can be in that too. But the thing I love about my journey, although it's been, I guess, a hard road, is the fact that I literally can see God's hand through it all. Like it's not something that I put a resume in and I had a job interview and I earned it. It's not something that I grew up with, so I had connections. It's not something that I had the theological training to do, in all of that either initially. But God equipped me and put amazing people around me and allowed that process to happen and allowed a lot of lives to be impacted. And I think in a lot of ways, it's probably been a little bit of an advantage in the sense that I think sometimes in church circles, we can be so stuck in our culture and our tradition, and particularly if we haven't had exposure to the world, so to speak. Like I have people that have grown up in the church all the time going, I don't have a testimony. Your testimony's amazing. I don't have a testimony. I'm like, no, you do. You just don't understand what it is. But because, it doesn't feel like you've had this big jump. But everyone has a process and something. But I think sometimes if we're stuck in that bubble and that culture, we kind of do things according to what's expected. And we're afraid to maybe rock the boat or challenge the way things have been done, especially when tradition's involved. Whereas for me, I kind of rocked the boat without realizing I was rocking the boat, because for me, I could just see all of these people that were, that when I opened up and I was vulnerable and shared my story, and I think probably blindly at first, because I was just being real and honest because that's how I'm wired. But it started to just open up people's, I guess, what would you say? I guess their insecurities and things, because it gave them permission to open up and be being vulnerable too, because a lot of people are just sitting there like feeling like they're the only one.
Yeah.
And like I'm talking like even 70 and 80-year-old women who have just come out and said, when I was a teenager or when I was a child, I was sexually abused, or, my grandson was stabbed to death, or my, just horrific things sometimes that can be a lot to bear, by the way, if you're not sitting in it with Jesus, which is one of the reasons I went and got my counselling qualifications so that I could be, very well equipped in that in managing those situations. But, I think sometimes we can try and cover up our hurts and our pains, and we keep it in the darkness. And the Bible doesn't tell us that. The Bible says that we are to be in the light as He is in the light, that we're to bring the light shines on the darkness. That's where we get released, right? So if we call ourselves out, if we bring all of our darkness out into the light, God heals it, God fixes it, God allows us to move on, and there's no condemnation then, because we're willing to work on it. And we can't heal what we don't feel. And I think sometimes we're so afraid of feeling that we forget that if we don't feel it, we're not going to heal it. And that's why we have people that are sitting in church and they're broken and they're triggered, or they're so walled up, don't let anybody in because they don't want to be hurt. And they don't realize that if they were brave enough to process through and get that healing and that release, that they could then go and help the next person up. Yep. Because people, there's a saying, it says people people are inspired by our victories, but they connect with our weakness. And, I think if we were more open about that in safe ways, we would understand one another a lot more. Like, why is, Auntie Betty always so cranky? Well, if we understood her backstory, maybe we'd have a bit more patience, a bit more care, And so, yeah, I think vulnerability is something that's super important, and we need to just show up as ourselves, because God's given us the experiences, good and the bad, and our personalities for a reason. And so, yeah, I think, it's just one of those things where it's so important to be yourself and use your giftings and understand that you're in a process, right? None of us arrive. We hear of these overnight success stories, but underneath them are a lot of people that have gone through a lot of things to grow them to be where they are. Can I share a bit of an illustration that kind of shares that? So, like, a few months ago, I was reading about this guy who grew a giant pumpkin, right? Like, massive. It's like you could almost carve it out and have it like a cubby house, right? It was huge. And he'd won a prize for it. And someone said, what's your secret? And he said, well, I give it X amount of liters of water a day, and I dump X amount of like big piles of manure on it. And I water it in, and of course it gets some sunshine, but piling all those nutrients on it and the water is how it gets really big, because it's sort of fertilized. I'm like, aren't we like that? Like, we need God, we need those rays of sunshine, and we need that living water to parch the dry areas. But it's actually also the crap that makes us grow, right? It's because it tells us how to behave or not to behave, what to do that damages relationships or that saves them. If we don't have something to compare it with, if we don't know how it feels to hurt, how can we have compassion on somebody else? And so I love the fact that God almost makes each of us a mini mentor, because we can only take someone as far as we've gone, but Jesus has gone all the way. And if we open up the Bible for any stretch of time, we pretty quickly learn that God has told everybody's stories and hung them out to dry, in the sense of nothing's hidden. Yeah. Like the story of David, it doesn't hide the fact that he had an affair. It doesn't hide the fact that he lost his son. It doesn't hide the fact that he was chased down by Saul. It doesn't hide the fact in the Psalms that he struggled with his life and his faith and fear and all of those things. But it also shows how God brings a victory. It also brings redemption. And so I don't know why, as a church sometimes, or as individuals, we feel like we've got to hide our stuff, when that's not the example God gave us, and it's not the example Jesus gave us.
Yeah, definitely. And that's so true. And actually very in line with what I feel like I've been really learning in my own personal journey of life lately. The world will say that we have to guard our hearts and put up all these shields and protectors to stop us from connecting deeply with people, because we can get hurt or mistreated. But the reality is, as you're saying, only when we are at a vulnerable place can the real growth and healing happen. And I think that's because we all have to come to a complete and total dependence on God being sovereign over every situation. And for my own personal victories in the last couple of years with friendships and connections, it has been, okay, I have to lay down my agenda or my feeling or my opinion about this. And I have to be vulnerable, even though it scares me, because only through that vulnerability can there be true healing. And I've just seen God move through that vulnerability. And I think that's amazing that through these vulnerable moments, people are able to open up and heal and connect. And some will happen faster than others. But I think through that all comes back to through Brave Enough and through podcasts and through things like this, how this opens up the exposure of more people in society being open to being vulnerable, causing this idea and understanding that it's okay to be vulnerable and speak out and share and do something totally back to front and upside down to the way that society originally does it, which is how the kingdom of God moves anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's so well said. And yeah, obviously we've got to be sensible with that. Like, we can also be in an unhealthy or vulnerable space and just overshare and share with the wrong people. And that gets us into all sorts of strife too. And that's why it's good to have counselors or trusted friends. And, sometimes you think you've got a trusted friend and you end up burnt, that's all part of life. But I think, yeah, finding really good mentors and safe people and spaces is super important for our growth.
Definitely. And
Yeah.
do you find that if you are someone who is, I guess, open to God and open to listening to the guidance of God, that because of his genuine care and love for us, that he will just put those kind of safe people in our journey to us to connect to? Like we won't have to run out and try to find these safe mentor kind of people.
Yeah, I think so. And especially when we pray for it. And I'd say the same with friendships even. Pray about that. God, who's in my circle that is not safe? Show me who's not safe and show me who is. And if there's someone, that I'm yet to meet or that's maybe on the outer circle that is safe, who is that?
Mm.
And I think there's something I wrote in my book that I still stand by today, was in Every Heart's Cry, is that there are levels of connection with friendship. And sometimes we connect with someone, sometimes you meet someone and you just click with them right off the bat.
Mm.
And then you go in thick and fast, but you don't kind of take time to get to know them. And then later on, you can get into a bit of trouble.
Mm.
Or, you may have an instant connection and it just ends up being a forever friend. But I think it's important to have levels of connection. And especially, I think, after people have been hurt or betrayed, it's particularly important to be able to just, you have someone who's maybe an acquaintance or someone at church and you know them on a level to say hi and have superficial conversations, and then, might be getting to talk about something one day and you can help someone with something. So, you help them on that deeper level and you might reveal a little bit more about yourself and, just test the waters, were they trustworthy with that? What kind of advice did they give me? Was that spot on? Or was it a bit toxic? And, just testing the waters a little bit and letting those relationships be guided by the Holy Spirit, and also not to put up blinders just because someone's fun or we gel with them or we're so desperate for a connection or a friend that we ignore the red flags. I think it's super important. And we've all done it. We've all shared, we've all probably gossiped and got into all of that kind of stuff. But I think as you get older, you learn that, your circle gets smaller in a really good way and you go for quality over quantity.
That's it. Definitely. I mean, I'm turned 30 this year and I'm just starting to learn that now.
Yeah.
I'm being someone who was an extrovert and is an extrovert. I always went for the numbers, I guess, and tried to connect with as many people as possible. And then when a majority of those people moved on or didn't connect with me as much as I thought I had connected with them, it would just like tear me down or like break my heart. And I'd go, why are all these people leaving all the time? And God had to show me one day, actually through something that really spoke to me, which was just a mental picture of a bouquet of flowers. And he just mentioned that like each flower represented a different person. And in my own strength, I tried to place certain people in my set bouquet, but he was picking them out because they weren't the right ones. And that was then making space for the right ones to come along and be put in. And that was a tough journey for me to have to learn because I was big on oversharing and just talking to everyone about everything. And some people accept it and go, wow, I really need to hear this. Thank you. And some people freak out and go, whoa, like, I just want to say hi. And you've told me your whole life story in the last like 30 seconds. Like, this is too much. And it's not easy for some people to deal with oversharing, but even to deal with someone's response that's unexpected to you oversharing. So that's been a journey for me. But yeah, we definitely all go through it and we learn through those incidences or those mistakes. Because I guess it's the only way we learn what's going to work and what's not going to work is either by making a mistake or seeing someone else make a mistake and learning from it. What would your advice or opinion be to people who, I guess, are just starting their journey of encountering Jesus or are wanting to deepen their encounters of Jesus every day in terms of, I guess, learning to be more vulnerable with God and with other people?
Yeah, I think always remember that God can fill needs and heal spaces that humans can't. And so, yeah, really, really seek after that intimate relationship with Jesus first, because you also need to know how to measure what's good for you and what's not. And that's all in the Bible, right? It's so if you don't know your way around a Bible, I would say find someone who is, get in touch with your local church and find someone who can study with you, and maybe even, let the pastor know what kind of a person you need. Like you might go, look, I need a younger female that understands this, and this, because that's stuff I'm dealing with. Or, just have people that you'll be able to relate and connect to. Same as thing as when you find a therapist. If you go to see a therapist and there's just something that just doesn't gel, find another one.
Yep.
Because you've got to be comfortable. If you're not feeling safe and comfortable, then, you're not going to be able to grow as much as you can. I'd also say, look at what you can learn from people that maybe have hurt you or behave in a way that doesn't sit with you, and not in a way to judge them or, I guess be pointing fingers or anything like that. But other than, what am I trying to say? Learn what not to do when you see other people doing the wrong thing, and take notice of why. Because if we can learn a lesson that saves us trouble without experiencing it ourselves, sometimes that can save us a lot of heartache too. But I'd also say when we do have those times where we trip up or we get that revelation, like, oh my gosh, that's awful, I'm an oversharer, that's embarrassing. You kind of look back on it and go, oh, what was I thinking? And, have compassion on yourself. You're in a process, you're growing, you're learning. But I'd also say, when you come out of a difficult situation and you need to, be able to move forward, don't get stuck where you are, but just do a bit of an autopsy on it. Have a look at it and say, what did I learn from this situation? What did I learn about the other person or the dynamics of what went on? What was okay? What wasn't okay? What was right? What was not right? And what did I learn about myself? What could I have done to handle things better? Or what would I do differently next time? Because I think when we can be super vulnerable with ourselves, and with God, then we've got something to take to God to be able to do that growth and that healing. And remember that, we're all imperfect. We've all got our stuff going on. And sometimes when people can't give to a relationship, it's not actually personal to us. It's just maybe they've got stuff going on that we don't know about, or for whatever reason, they don't have capacity.
Mm.
And sometimes there's times and seasons too to friendships and even callings. I think, we can be called to one thing in one season and something else in another. And I would say just ride it like a wave, go boogie boarding with Jesus.
No, that's very, very powerful and very true. I think definitely the more we experience things and the more we are able to be vulnerable with God and with others about it, the easier we can process in self-reflection about what we have learnt and what we do. I know quite a lot of people have suggested that people journal. I know journaling isn't everybody's thing, but I definitely think for people who write or who struggle with speaking out what they're feeling, I think writing it down definitely is one, and that's definitely what the Psalms is all about. And yeah, pretty much everything that you've said, I feel like is fully backed up by the Bible. Like the Bible is the place to go to as well, where it's just any experience we could ever encounter, someone's encountered it, and it's been revealed in there in its own ways. And I think that knowing that also strengthens our ability to know, well, if they've gone through it and Jesus helped them, then he can help me too.
Yeah.
And then yes, and continue to find people to talk to and grow with. And yeah, I feel like this has just been very encouraging and full of a lot of life-giving advice and wisdom that I think is going to bless many people. So thank you. One question I've started adding in at the end of podcast episodes now is because the podcast is called the Living Unashamed podcast. I ask people, what does living unashamed mean to them?
Wow. I think living unashamed to me is freedom. I think it's that ability to be able to go, you know what, I am imperfect. I get that. I've given it to Jesus and I'm going to do my best moving forward, because I think we can't live life in a rearview mirror.
Mm.
We're not choosing to be bad and do bad and getting caught up in sin. To live unashamed, we get to let go of all of that. We get to just take it as a lesson and move forward in freedom, knowing that God has the next thing, and that we can sometimes, even despite our shame, go on to be a blessing to other people, to help save them, the lessons that we've learned from them having to go through that or walking through them with it. To be unashamed is to be safe in Jesus.
Mm. How beautiful. Yeah, that's it's very true and very yeah. I don't even really know what to say after that. I feel like I've just pretty much summed it up well. It's very freeing and very light, like when those things are lifted. I think for many people, the challenge is learning how to be brave enough to talk about what they've experienced, but not be held back by what they've experienced.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that God will continue to guide people in for the rest of their lives, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you so much for taking the time to come and chat and share. I feel like it's just been such a blessing, and yeah, I really appreciated part of your busy schedule that you're able to just come and share, and I know this is going to really bless a lot of people. So thank you very much.
Well, Ruth, I just have to say, you've done so much growing since I first met you back in 2018 at that Brave Enough conference, or 2019 it might have been. But, I'm so proud of you as a sister in Jesus with everything that you're doing, and keep going, because these are conversations that need to be had. People need to know that they can live unashamed. And I think you're really onto something with Jesus.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, well, just like you give all God the credit for what he's done in you. This was a God breathed idea that I didn't even know how to start. And I just was like, well, if it's what he wants, he will bring the people. He will provide the lessons I need in order to let it function well, even just to do a podcast episode and function it. And even though I haven't used it today, he even blessed me in having a connection that has allowed me to have a whole mic system and everything that I didn't have before. And I'm able to borrow it and gain experience with it, which is amazing because last season was all done just through Zoom like this. So next time, one of the next following episodes, I should be able to discover a bit more about how to plug in the mic and everything and be able to do that, which is awesome.
That's great. There you go. After this, I might even be able to have a look at it if it's the same system as mine.
Sounds good. Am I able to pray for you before we finish up?
Would be awesome, Ruth. Thank you so much.
No worries. Lord, I thank you for Danni. I thank you for your tender, loving mercies and care over her. Everything she has encountered and experienced in her life, Lord, you have continued to reveal yourself to her through and bring healing to, and just continue to shelter her under the protection of your wing. Lord, I just thank you for all that you have provided opportunities for her to step into with writing a book and stepping into podcasting and doing radio and stepping into all these different streams of ministry over the span of her life. And we know that there is still so much more to come. And we know that, this is such a beautiful God-ordained thing for this time and this generation. And we're just so excited with all that you've done. Thank you for her recovery from medical things that happened last year. And we just thank you for your strengthening and empowerment over her and her family and protection. And we look forward to hearing how much more you continue to bless and progress the Brave Conversations and Brave Enough as a company in the days to come too, Lord. And we just thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
No worries.
Well, I'm so honored that Danni was able to come and share her journey of encountering Jesus and all the amazing things that he has blessed her with in this season of life, and the things that she has healed from and overcome through her relationship with Jesus as well. It has been an honor to have you tuning in today to listen. Pray you are abundantly blessed. And until next time, this is Ruth Turner signing out.